Brains in Motion with Mary McKone, EdD and Angela Zielinski, DPT. Please remember that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This is not medical advice, and this is just general discussion for educational purposes. Thank you. Enjoy. A note for these first couple episodes. We are excited to share this project with you, but remember, we are still learning, and please be kind. Thank you. Welcome. This is our first episode of
Brains in Motion. Wonderful. So glad to be here, Angela.
How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Can't wait to get this podcast rolling.
All right. So we're going to just start by introducing ourselves. I'm Angela. I am a physical therapist. I specialize in reflex integration, and I have some letters after my name. I've got a doctorate of physical therapy. I've got some yoga training certifications, and I am a MRI core in training, which just means I keep taking classes. How about you? Tell us what your letters are.
Yeah, so I'm a kind of an unusual duck in this work, in that I came from the field of education. So I spent almost 30 years of my life as a reading and dyslexia specialist. So my 3 letters are a doctorate of education. And I started my journey in reflexes about 20 years ago. So I trained in Brain Gym and became an instructor there, and then moved into RMTI and then MNRI, also a core specialist in training, and have also done some training in developing brains from Dr. Heath in the UK. I am a full-time reflex integration specialist, and I only work remotely at this stage in my life. So I work with folks all over the world.
Can I ask some questions about that? I didn't realize you've been doing it for so long. That's amazing. You started with Brain Gym. How did you find that?
Oh, gosh. So I was a reading specialist at the high school level, and I just started teaching reading. And all of my students, although I worked in a district that was, 85% Latino, all of the students in my reading class were born in this country. They weren't migrant students. They'd all grown up in the area. They'd gone through the English learner programs, and yet they were non-readers or reading at a first grade level, which is really a non-reader coming into high school. And I was just baffled by this, because I started as a English as a second language specialist with a degree in English, and then was asked to do this. And well, how is that possible? And then I just started noticing in the first couple months of school that they all did kind of strange things with their body. Like, I had some kids who just literally couldn't stay seated in a chair, or they would support themselves with their, on their elbow, or they had to turn sideways to write, or they felt more comfortable sitting on the floor. And I just thought, every kid in the class is doing that. There has to be something here. And so I started Googling. Thank goodness we had the internet in, 2005. And I found this book called Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in Your Head. That's by Dr. Carla Hannaford. And I looked her up because I was fascinated. I read it in 2 days, and then I was kind of mad. Nobody's ever told me this information, and I have a degree in education. What? So I looked her up, and she was a trainer in Brain Gym. And I found a Brain Gym training a week later, and I was fascinated. I didn't understand it. It felt a little crunchy granola to me at the time, what is this? But I came back to my classroom, and I told my students, I don't know what this is that I found, honestly, but instinctively I feel like it's going to help you. So if you'll just play along with me, please, let's see what happens. And so I had them for 2 hours a day. So 1 hour a day, we just did simple Brain Gym activities like cross crawls and lazy eights and double doodles. If our folks are familiar with Brain Gym, all hands off, because I was in the classroom. And by day 3, we started seeing shifts. Kids who had never been able to segment sounds, suddenly could segment sounds. And
that's wild.
Yeah, it was
3 days.
Yeah, things just started clicking, and the kids were like, "Why? What? I couldn't do that yesterday." And I was like, "I know." And then, that just, then it was another class and another class, and
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, I
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think because I found this work, I have 100% success rate as a reading specialist, breaking the code for persistent non-responders. And it's not, it's a combination of really good instruction, science-based instruction, but also without this work, without getting the connections made in the brain, that wouldn't have happened. So yeah, that's kind of how I got in. And once I was in, I was like, I must know more. There's more,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I didn't know that. That's so cool, Mary. Um, wow. And so now, how long have you been doing? So you were a teacher, you've been doing that's like
Oh,
your entry point.
yeah.
How long have you been doing just reflex integration? I know you recently switched to virtual,
Yeah.
but like how long have you been? You've made kind of a switch
Yeah.
recently. So
I
tell me about
sure
the
did.
recent switches.
Yeah. So my last role was as an administrator at a school for dyslexia, a private school. Probably the best educational job in my life here in Oregon. And then I got long haul COVID and was like, yeah, I can't do this job and recover. So I decided it's just too demanding. So I decided to retire from education early, obviously. And I started a full time practice. So that was just in 2022. So I've been doing it full time. I was doing it, part time while I was in education.
Sure. Right.
But I started full time 3 years ago. And then in May, I flipped to a fully remote program. Yeah. And that's really been wonderful. It was a great switch. How about you, Dr. Angela? How did you get into reflex work from physical therapy?
um, That's a great question. I knew when I graduated from PT school, I went into skilled nursing, but I knew I always wanted to work with kids. It's a great experience. I had a great building, nice people. But when it was time to switch, I was looking for a pediatric job that wasn't school based because a lot of school based is like positioning. And while I enjoy school, it just wasn't. I wanted to interact more with kids and versus like pulling kids in and out of classrooms and things like that. And so there was one job available. And so I applied, and I was very lucky. The person who owned the clinic answered the phone and was like, sure. I was like, and the posting had been up for a while. So I was like, hey, it looks like you're hiring a PT. Is this still available? And she was like, yeah, you want to do an interview right now? And I was like, sure, let's do an interview. So I talked to her on the phone and she goes, we do this specialized technique at the clinic. There's actually a class this weekend. Like I called on like a Tuesday, right? And she's like, there's a class this weekend. Um, it's called MNRI. It's reflex integration. We use this technique here at the clinic. If you take this class, we'll hire you. And I was like, okay. So I really wanted to work with kids. So I went to the class. I thought, hey, it's continuing ed, right? And so the first class I took was neurotactile. That was the class. And I'm a person who really needs reflex integration and didn't know it. And so this class, neurotactile, is 2 days of just touching people that you don't know, strangers, hands-on work, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that at the time. And it wasn't, I went through this class, and historically, if I had done a class like that, I would have been overstimulated. I would have hated it. I would have been very cranky the next day. And I went to work the Monday after this class, and everybody was like, you good? You had a class this weekend, right? You seem really calm. And I was like,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I was like, it wasn't, I was like, I think I liked it. And they were like, but they were touching you, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. Like it was this wild thing of like
Yeah.
something I couldn't explain. And and neurotactile does a good job of like linking like to the sensory system, right? And talking about corpuscles and
Yeah.
talking about all the stuff that we talk about in PT school.
Yeah.
And so like it tracked and it made sense. And then on top of making sense like scientifically and tracking with my background, I could tolerate it, which historically has
Yeah.
never happened
That's
in that way.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's when I was like, all right, and so I started working for this clinic and started using it with kids and took more classes, and just every time I used it, things would happen that I couldn't explain
Yeah.
or understand, and that's when I wanted to learn more and like,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and keep using it, right? Like it's like that
Yeah.
piece of, like you said, you don't know why it's happening at first,
Right.
right? It's just you're taking these techniques and they seem so simple. Like you're making figure eights either on the body manually or in the air.
Yeah.
And now there's a connection being made.
Yeah.
Like,
Right?
right?
So crazy. It's so wild because when I've had people say various things about this work and oh that training doesn't work, this can't work, but like you, like I had a life altering experience when I had many reflexes still active. I had some injuries in early childhood and early adulthood, and I had many reflexes active and was in a ton of physical pain every day of my life. And I was in fight or flight for the first, 37 years of my life because of childhood experiences. And, trying my best to be a teacher and a mom and a partner. And in that state is hard. And I went through these RMT classes, and it was actually Moira Dempsey that integrated all of my reflexes in like 4 days' time. She
That's
recognized
wild.
she recognized how much pain I was in and said, "Honey, I'm gonna help you." And so gave me some extra attention during those 4 days. It was life altering to go from being sometimes having to climb up my stairs on my hands and knees to
Oh,
having free range of motion and control over my own body and not having to be in massage and acupuncture and chiropractic just to live. So I'm a believer because it healed things in my body. And also, there's emotional components that people don't understand. Um, the way we store memory pre-verbally is different than the way we store memory once we have words, once we have language and or expressive language. So even unlocking things at that very deep level can be quite life altering for adults. And I know I say that, and then we're gonna have a bunch of people contact us to work with us, but I only work with peds at this time with children also. Just for clarification, but it's so powerful what can happen when we remove obstacles in the brain and allow those
yeah.
pathways and information to flow freely. So similar experiences, yeah.
Very much so. And like it's an ongoing process for me,
Yeah.
but reflex integration definitely is one of the components that has allowed me to improve on so many levels.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for it. So that's partially why we're doing this, right?
Right?
Is like to
Yeah.
talk about it and to um, share experiences and it's amazing because both of us have very personal experiences as well as like clinically we have seen like using it, we have seen it help kids because if the sooner you get it,
Yeah.
because reflexes are supposed to be that foundational piece for infants, and so the sooner you can help that foundation, the better it is. And so that's why we like working with kids, is because we can help them with their lives, right? Like the you want to be able to have freedom from the patterns.
Right.
And so
Yeah. You want to be
um
able to flourish and thrive and w- operating in the world, showing up, existing in the world shouldn't be a struggle every day. Right.
yes,
And
yes, right.
all of the kids that I work with are they struggle to get through the day to exist, coordinating their body, handling sensory input. Like classrooms are so overwhelming for kids when you don't have good sensory processing. It's something I talk to my parents a lot. Having spent so many years inside the school system myself, it can be a very overwhelming environment for anybody, let alone if you have sensory processing, postural deficits, vestibular issues. So Yeah,
Yeah,
it's always great to watch people flourish. So
it is.
you mentioned that reflexes are foundational for infants. So maybe we should define for folks what reflexes are.
Great question. So, um, there are different verbiages for reflexes, right?
Yeah.
So, like, it's really hard because people label them differently and people have different ideas of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but because in my heart, I love Dr. Maskatova and her work. Um, I like to use like her very specific definition
Sure.
and then we can kind of keep talking about it because I'm somebody, as you'll learn in this podcast, Mary, oh my gosh, so good with her science, so good with like finding like the very specific thing. And I'm more of like a feeler of like I see this and I have some like to me it's like many levels, which Mary agrees with too. I just tend to be a little bit uh mine's more experience based and more of like how I feel through it. So like
Mm-hmm.
when you say what's a reflex, I want to give you like the in
Okay.
my mind how I learned it. So on Dr. Maskatova's website, maskatovamethod.com, it says a reflex is a motor response that automatically occurs each time a particular stimulus is presented. So that stimulus could be sensory, that stimulus could be vestibular, that stimulus could be auditory. Like when there is a stimulus, you have an automatic response, which you can see a lot in babies, right?
Right.
Because they're coming out of like birth is an automatic response, right?
Well, so to give a couple more specific examples for our listeners, so if you stroke the side of a baby's foot, what happens? Big toe goes up, little toes go down, foot rotates to midline, right? That's Babinski. Or if you touch the center of their hand, their mouth will open. That's Babkin palmamental. If you touch the side of their face, they'll rotate towards where they're that side. That's the rooting reflex. So the sensory input is what fires the motor response, and that is a primitive reflex. That is what defines it as primitive, and there's a whole set of reflexes that are primitive. Primitive just means they're present at birth, and all of them are a response to stimulus. But then they don't stay primitive, right, Angela? What happens then?
Right. Reflexes start to mature, pathways start to mature,
Mm-hmm.
and you have primary reflexes, you have postural reflexes,
Mm-hmm.
writing reflexes.
Yep.
Um, and so the pathway starts to change.
Yep. So what I Isabel Renaud and Dr. Muscatova have said that the difference between primitive to primary is that when the response to stimulus disappears, then it's a primary reflex. And and this is really important for people because what you'll hear online all the time is only the verbiage primitive reflex. You cannot integrate a reflex when it's in its primitive state. As long as you're firing off that set of nerves, um, that's going to the parietal lobe, right? The sensory responses from the hands, as long as that's what's firing off, and you're getting a motor response to that, you cannot integrate a reflex. It will not mature to the full point of integration. So you have to get through the sensory response. Once that disappears, though, that doesn't mean a reflex is integrated. You still have to work on the motor part. And it's important that you go all the way through, which that's going to be a topic for another podcast. But I just wanted to put it out there for a beginning one, because that's something I run a Facebook group for reflex work. There's like 25,000 people in it now. And that's something I see all the time is
It's great.
I know it grew really quickly.
That's so many people.
It's
Wow.
so many people. Um, but um, this term primitive reflexes is a bit incorrect because there's primitive we want them to become primary so that we can integrate them. But then there's also postural and writing reflexes. And then there's moro and fear paralysis, which we're going to have to talk about another day. But those are really reflexes, I put that in air quotes, of the autonomic nervous system. So that they have their own separate class and really shouldn't be viewed as a developmental reflex. They have a different activity in the brain. But huge topic, and definitely for another.
Huge. It is, but we want to talk about it at least a little, or broach the subject.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different ideas of what a reflex is.
Yeah.
There's so many misunderstandings
Yeah.
about what a reflex is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people use, say one thing but mean another.
Yeah.
Or many things, like a reflex is also what a lot of people see in other professions. So like what I might classify as a reflex, a PT would classify as a Trendelenburg gait, or they would classify it as like a scoliosis is because of just muscle weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And while those are at play, I also see reflex integrations or reflexes
that
playing
retained
as well.
Right? Yeah, retained reflexes, right?
Yes.
So when a reflex sticks around longer than it should, usually they should be gone by the end of the first year, then we say they're retained. They haven't done their job. And a lot of folks that I talk to have a hard time understanding. They think that reflexes are just about motor movement, about moving a child learning how to move their body. But maybe you could speak for just a minute from your experience about what else do reflex patterns do besides mature motor movement?
So in my experience, especially with babies, it's easiest to see as a motor movement, but all reflexes have so many components to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm working on, for let's say torticollis, baby's looking one direction, this is just very simple. This isn't how it goes, to be clear. This isn't the treatment plan. This is just an example. If ATNR is on to the right, so their right arm is always straight, they're always looking to the right, they're having a hard time looking to the left, I might use ATNR to help them open up, what I call open up to the left side.
Mm-hmm.
But what's actually opening is not just an arm movement, a head movement, and a leg movement, but also vision, also vestibular system, also auditory system, and emotional regulation. Because if you're always stuck, and this is like my verbiage, if you're stuck on one side and you're always kind of fighting your body, is the way I feel about it inside. Like that's the way that I felt before, is I'm fighting to try and do this movement instead of just moving through it easily.
Yes.
You work, it's less work to be in the world if you're not fighting your body.
True story. Yeah, I mean, that's a lived experience for me. And the other, the way that I usually explain it to people is, when a baby is first born, the first few months of life, they're helpless. They have no intentional movement. Everything a baby does is a reflexive movement, right? They hear mom's voice. They might move their head after the first month, or they don't recognize a sound and we get a startle response. There's no intentional movement, right? They're not speaking. They can't like get up and walk. They're not talking. So how do babies get from that helpless state to, by 3 years of age, they can talk and problem solve and run and jump and skip and are learning to count and identify letters? That's through reflex patterns, right? So it's not just about motor and sensory, but also cognition, right? The way that we reach the higher orders of the brain, like learning, occurs in the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex primarily. Hippocampus is midbrain, but also deeply involved for memory. But primarily, we're looking up here in the neocortex, both language centers on the left hemisphere of the neocortex. How do we get up there? It is through the reflex pattern. So the sensory input activates the parietal lobes, which then activate the motor cortex. That's how we get up there, is through those patterns. It's really
It's
fast,
amazing.
right? So when people say, oh,
Yeah.
well, my kid's struggling with reading, or, they're not focusing and attending, they may get a label of dyslexia or a label of ADHD, but why? My question's always why? Why are they struggling? And although education will diagnose based on certain tests, those never tell the whole story. Just like you might get a diagnosis of ADHD, that's only based on observational criteria. So why? Well, there's connections in the brain that haven't been made or aren't myelinated, so the information's not flowing freely enough. So reflex work is one of the ways in which you can build stronger patterns to increase learning and focus and attention.
So amazing, right?
Like,
Like that's so cool. And it can be seen through movement. That's like the easiest lens
yeah,
to see, right? Everything Mary just said is often reduced to movement because that's what we understand. Movement is life, right? Like if
yeah,
you aren't moving,
true
you
story.
aren't you right? Like you got to be able to move to learn cause and effect, to be able to have those
Right,
sensory pathways, and like that's
right,
how you grow. But all of those internal workings with your nervous system, like Mary just explained, is what's actually happening on the inside.
yeah,
And it's so cool that like we have these innate patterns, and the part that even I myself forget sometimes because um is it's easier to use the patterns to be able to for treatment, but the real truth is you want to use these patterns to be able to break free of the patterns, to have intentional movement,
right,
right?
right.
And so that's
Right.
like the cool part.
Well, and that's such a really good point. Is we see a lot of people putting out these movements that you can do, right? Like starfish and snow angel and cannonball. And for some kids, that may be all they need to finish the integration of a reflex. Maybe it's just hanging on the very edge. But in what I have learned, and I know that you have learned because we've done a lot of the same study, is that there is first the sensory part, and then there's an original pattern, and then there's variant patterns. As the reflex begins to mature and kids start developing intentional movement, like, initially a baby will only turn their foot towards midline because of Babinski, but eventually they'll learn how to rotate their foot the other way, and now that's a variant pattern on Babinski and what comes before integration. So reflexes go on this whole journey. It's not oftentimes what you see online in videos would be the last stop of this reflex train. And if you really want to do more than just inhibit a specific movement, you have to follow the pathway all the way through. So sensory input, original pattern, alternate pattern. Some people call that a disruptive pattern. Dr. Muskatova calls it a variant pattern. And then it integrates. Maybe you could speak to what the idea of integration is. What does that mean when we say the reflex has integrated?
Well, I kind of have a different view of it, I think, than
Okay.
most people. So I think this is good to talk about
Okay.
because my belief is that the word reflex integration, everything to me is reflex integration, like yoga, exercise, cuddles, massage, acupuncture, energy work. All of that to me is a piece of it because it's working on your sensory system, it's working on your motor patterns, it's working on all of those pieces. And so there are all of that is what I would call reflex integration in your body because your body is learning how to take this input, process it, and then to me, integration means I can process the information and do with it what I will.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there's no blockages. I'm not stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting an input and having to do exactly the motor response. So, like, if a baby looks to the right, their right arm straightens to grab something. If I look to the right as an adult, I should be able to just look to the right as an adult and not put my arm out and not have
Mm.
to have a motor response. I can choose to put my choice. Reflex integration to me is about choice. And so I feel like all of those different types of inputs help your body make choices. In terms of reflex integration from like a program standpoint or from a scientific standpoint, reflex integration to me means that there's a sensory stimulus and then the pathway is clear and I can make a choice for a motor response. I don't
Mm.
have to
Right.
be stuck in a response. What's your view
Yeah.
of reflex integration, Mary?
Similarly, right? So when I say a reflex has integrated, that means there's no response to stimulus. That motor movement is fluid, that it is symmetrical on both sides, that there's no compensation on the body, that this pattern has finished its pathway, and now um, I could choose to use it if I wanted to. Like for example, when we play tennis, we're using an ATNR pattern to play
Mm-hmm.
tennis, right?
Yes.
Right. If I'm doing push-ups, I'm using hand supporting pattern, but those are no longer a response to my environment. They're now part of my nervous system and can be used to support me for whatever I need. But it's
Yes.
not on a reflexive movement. So you're not like a prisoner to your own nervous system, right?
Yes. Right.
You're just moving in the world because you have all this available to you. And I have two granddaughters. They are through almost 3 and almost 2, and my youngest one lives quite close to me, so I get to see her all the time. And at 21 months, it's just been really fascinating to watch this development in her as she's moved through all of her reflexes, and they are now fully integrated. To watch her be able to make specific choices about how to move her body to get down off of things or to get into things or problem solve using her own body. When reflexes are retained, that option doesn't exist for kids. They aren't able to make those choices about how they move their body. Their body's just moving, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
and I feel like the anxiety for me, I'm gonna call it anxiety
Yes.
piece of like if I can't move the way I want to, I start to get anxious and I
Oh,
start to get these internal feelings.
yes.
And then my sensory system starts to flare up because I feel unsafe because I feel like I don't know how to move my body. That's
100%. And that is a big
yeah.
reason why Moro stays active, is that the brain perceives it's not safe because we have postural instability. Our vestibular system is underdeveloped. We can't accurately process auditory and visual information. All of those things are threats to survival. Even foot reflexes, if we have active Babinski and plantar, we're not stable on our feet, we're not grounded. That vagus nerve is firing off. Lack of safety, lack of safety. One of the responses of being in sympathetic state is anxiety. That is part of the physiological neurological response of our autonomic nervous system is anxiety, because anxiety says slow down, be cautious, you're not safe. Is this safe? I don't think you're safe. So kids live in this constant state of anxiety, which again in our culture is a separate diagnosis. But if you look at the pattern of the child, there's usually a connected something connecting these things: ADD, autism, auditory processing disorder, anxiety, developmental movement disorder. There's usually a commonality underneath. Even in dyslexia, it's a pretty clear pattern of reflexes that I'll find when I assess a kid with dyslexia. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so all of this is just broad, and I know we've talked about a lot of different topics, but this is kind of our intro. And one of the things that we put on our intro was reflex integration, fact or fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we put that is because Mary and I have been having this in-depth conversation and we've felt these things in our body, right? Like, so like we have felt them. And so coming from personal experience, our evidence is our own case studies,
Right.
right? But a lot of people will ask us, are reflexes even real? Is reflex integration real? And I think part of that is kind of what we talked about earlier, is like the language around reflexes is so challenging right now, I feel like, because
Mhm.
everybody means something a little bit
Yeah.
different. But, Mary, we know, we've felt it through your studies
Yeah.
and things like that. What was your introduction to, like, were reflexes real, I guess, is my first question. And then, well, how do you see it now? Like,
Yeah.
what? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've all heard of reflexes. All of us have. It's just that they're called developmental milestones. So when
Yes.
you have a
Yes.
baby, right?
Yes.
When you have a baby, you're given a developmental chart by the doctor, or it's in, what to expect in the first year online. And we know that every baby should go through certain milestones by certain times. Why? How do we know that? Because, and we didn't mention this before, that reflex patterns are encoded in our DNA. So the birth process itself actually activates these patterns, and they actually come on in utero. But then the birth process itself, with the proprioceptive input from the contractions and the birth canal and all of that, activate this genetic code further. We know that they exist. We've known for thousands of years of what babies are supposed to do during a certain time period. And when they don't do that, it's like, oh, that they're a little behind. Maybe you want to, go seek out some OT or PT. And then if it becomes greater, then we say that there's a developmental delay, usually. And then if it's from birth and there's lots of delays, it's a global developmental delay. So we know it just by a different name. Everybody knows it by a different name. But if you go back in the research in the 30s and 40s, like Glenn Dolman and the Philadelphia Institutes was doing repatterning work in the 1930s. The Russian psychologists were documenting this work in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's just that the interventions were a lot slower to come on board than what we already knew. And now with the advent of, SPECT scans like Daniel Amen uses, or PET scans, and functional MRIs. I know Dr. Muscatova has done some research. Now we can actually track exactly where in the brain certain movements or certain patterns are making changes, and even sensory input. I know she did some research. I think you and I were in that class together when she was talking about using the sensors to track what part of
Oh,
the
yeah.
brain
Mm-hmm.
the sensory
Mm-hmm.
input was impacting directly. And so finding the exact point for the sensory input using that level of
Yeah.
research. Yeah. So for fun one day, because somebody posted a question in the Facebook group about, well, are there any studies? Can you cite some? So I went into Google Scholar, which, if you have never used Google Scholar, it's Google for research studies. So it's an
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
academic Google database. It's fantastic. There were 143 studies published on primitive reflexes and 291,000 on postural reflexes.
I'm sorry, did you say so 1,000?
143,000 published studies with the keywords
With those words?
primitive reflexes, 291,000 studies on postural reflexes.
That is wild.
It is wild, right? So I do want to give a caveat here about academic research and reflexes, because most of the studies that you're going to find are case studies. And so if there's anybody out there in the research realm, you're like, well, that's not the gold standard in studies. You're right. We both have doctorates, so we've both done academic research, and you're right. That is not the gold standard. So why aren't there any randomized control trials using this work?
Oh,
Because children are a protected population. Disabled
yes,
children are a doubly protected population. The reason,
as they should be.
right? As these protections were put in place because of some really terrible things that were done in the past, doing experiments on people of a certain race, or with certain disabilities, and and they were harmful. The people were literally harmed, or some people were not given the treatment that they needed because they wanted to see the difference. So that would be your control group and research. So all these laws were put in place to protect people. Protected populations is what they're called. So when you're working with a doubly protected population, it is unethical to withhold treatment from one group, right? And you would
Yeah.
never get IRB, Institutional Review Board, approval for an experimental study with a control group on a double protected population. So case studies are the safest way. And a case can be a group of people. It doesn't have to be one person, which is kind of a misunderstanding. So you can apply a treatment, we're going to do these 5 movements with these kids over this period of time, and then track their progress in these things, right? You can do that with a whole group and track their progress and publish that as a case study. And there is an ability to generalize from case studies if they're well constructed. So that was probably too much information,
No,
but
it's good.
it is such a common question that I get. And the short answer is there is research, but you have to understand what you're reading and why you're not going to find, if you have experience in that area where there are no RCTs. Because of that reason, it wouldn't be right to do that ethically. So
Yeah. And so thank you, Mary. And as there should be, right? And so that's an amazing amount of studies. I never would have thought that there was that amount. So that's cool that you did that. I was going to say there's articles that have been peer reviewed and published on the Dr. Maskatova website.
Yeah.
There are articles on Move, Play, Thrive, which is Sonia's story. She does a good job, I feel like, of posting when articles come through.
Yep.
And so it's this piece where everyone agrees. Like, I like how you said it was the milestones. I've never thought of it that way, so that's really cool.
Well, take an example of that, right? So take an example of one of the milestones is babies are able, they're on their bellies, they're in prone position, and they're able to push themselves up on their forearms, right? We consider that a milestone. Well, what reflexes are those, Angela?
Oh, so many. If you on the spot,
pick a couple.
Like Perez,
Perez,
PLR. It is hand supporting
and trunk extension,
head riding, and trunk extension.
Yeah,
but on top of that, this is actually a good question because it goes into when we talk about this more. It's always more than one thing because if you had an ATNR that wasn't firing correctly, it might not specifically be ATNR, but let's say only one side of ATNR is firing, you wouldn't be able to do that. So ATNR plays a role in that as well. So there's when somebody says it's one reflex, it can't be. It just isn't.
I get that a lot. Like, what's the reflex for auditory processing? And I'm like, yeah, it's just not that easy. Yeah. So most people think of pushing up on arms as spinal Perez, but trunk extension is involved, which in research is actually called the Vollmer reflex, Vollmer.
Interesting.
It's very, very, it's usually confused with spinal Perez, but they were different researchers in different countries and some at the same time, and somehow they got mixed up in the literature, but they're actually, so Dr. Maskatova calls it trunk extension, but it's the Vollmer reflexes. I just learned that a few weeks ago, actually.
That's fun. I like that.
Yeah.
So you're right, Mary. Milestones and pushing up on your arms is such a variety of reflexes, right? So there seems to be a language piece. So milestones are like an accepted term.
Yes.
But people often will say, well, I've never heard about reflex integration. Is reflex integration real? Or they'll say things like, I've heard that reflex integration doesn't work. Or I think there's a language piece. Do you want to talk about that, or what you've seen in the community, or why do people think reflex integration isn't real? I guess or reflexes aren't real.
Sure. Well, they kind of got lost for a long time. We're a very diagnosis-driven culture and Western culture.
Yeah.
We really like labels. And it's something that has to be fixed from the top down, right? We can write a prescription. You can do these, you can go to this therapy. Like, But reflex integration work is a bottom up approach. We're developing the nervous system from the very beginning and allowing it to naturally develop. So there is it it doesn't this approach, this bottom up approach, much like kind of the holistic approach of naturopathic medicine, it runs into conflict with a diagnosis driven culture. So you mean that this state could be altered? Like, that's baffling to me because everything we do, everything that we learn is about neuroplasticity. Education itself is neuroplasticity in action. Every time you learn a math fact, changes have occurred in your brain. We've known this for decades now that the brain is plastic. And yet there's still this perception that if a child has this diagnosis put on them, that that's just their state and there can't be any improvement in their state, whether that's dyslexia or autism or ADHD or whatever, that this is just the label. And you can simultaneously get a developmental chart at a pediatrician's office and be told it's okay if your child didn't crawl, which is really such a disconnect because crawling is a milestone. And what enables crawling? Like 15 different reflexes are involved in the act of crawling. I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot involved.
No, that's it. Or more.
Right?
Yeah.
Creeping, they call it in the UK. They are in Europe. It's not crawling on all fours; it's called creeping.
Here too for PT. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to clarify for those listening. That's often a disconnect. So crawling is like Bower crawling, belly crawling, commando crawling, and then creeping is on all fours. But there's just a disconnect in our kind of diagnosis-driven culture, and this idea that it could actually be this simple. Like I was talking to this mom, baby was brain injured at birth and is 3 and has profound global developmental delay. And we've only been working together a couple weeks, and the baby's already, the 3-year-old is already responding. Like she's already seeing changes in eye contact and attempting to move. And it's just really simple, gentle movement. And I think in our culture as well, there's this idea of no pain, no gain, that if something's not complicated, it can't possibly work. And how could something this simple and this gentle work? We're just allowing the brain to find its way, our brain and our body to find its way to homeostasis, which it will always struggle to find. So if we just kind of open the gateway with gentle, targeted approaches, you can see remarkable change. The brain will, it's almost like, oh, thank God, I've been trying to do that for years. Woo, okay. I know.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, that's a good
body.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
thank you. Woo. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good, I like the way that you put that. And it's also what MNRI will say a lot is that reflex integration is the missing link.
Yes.
And for me, I feel like it's really important just because I have a background in so many different things and I've felt different things in my body is it's a link. And so for me, it's not going to be just one thing, which is also why going back to like the research and the case studies is the one thing isn't going to be the same for everyone, which makes it really complicated to diagnose, right? And complicated to understand.
Right.
And it's just one piece.
I have such a good example of that. Sorry, I'm just like chomping at the bit.
No, yeah, please. Yeah.
So I started working with this kiddo, double deficit dyslexia, which means phonological and orthographic processing deficits. And they went to this specialized center where they do these, like 2-month intensives with OT and PT and speech and some reflex work. I put that in air quotes. And then intensive Orton Gillingham work. And the kiddo came back and there's still these areas they're struggling in. And when I looked through all the testing, it's like strong phonological processing, but still double deficit dyslexia. And that doesn't make sense, right? On paper, that doesn't make sense. But her pattern was her phonological processing was working. So 18R is integrated. We checked it, right? So we've got that pathway over to the temporal lobe, but her access to her language networks was impacted. So she couldn't transfer that knowledge to attach it to letters, which And just in the world of reading, we call it paired association. Letter with a sound is a paired association. But this isn't a normal pattern. Normally, you would see really poor phonological processing. Well, then that made me think about, okay, well, how do we access language networks? How do we get into that, right? It's not the normal thing we would see in dyslexia because every kid is different. The way that you activate to get there is actually through sensory input. So we went back and assessed all the sensory reflexes, hands, mouth, and feet, and voila, we found lots of things there. So that, right. So when we talk about a reflex integration program, personalized is vital. That if you like do something that was pulled off a shelf, it's not personalized to your kiddo. And it really is quite specific and quite scientific, even though all practitioners, like Angela, I know you are more of a feel your way through it. I certainly am that way, but I am a much more linear thinker. We've talked about that many times. But that we have to kind of, when you're diagnosing and trying to really track down where, it's not just what reflexes should we approach, but where's the best starting point for this particular child. And some kids can't handle vibration at all. Some kids, we have to do like all this deep pressure first before we can even get to like a higher level of input, like a vibration plate, or even like vibration on like their palmar reflex before we get into passive movement. That's the approach I use. And so even for those kids, I might have to adapt because they can't even do this piece yet. Or maybe I use a brain gym technique with one kid first, like naval radiation, before we move on to six-ended star from MNRI, because they need that comfort and security that comes with something more like naval radiation. Like it's just it is very complicated. And so like I think my parting words for folks on this subject would be finding a very qualified practitioner is vital, because not all people have the same level of training, and the understanding of how complex the brain is and how complex patterns are and how they manifest differently in kids. Like you said, like not being able to get up in spinal parese might actually be ATNR, right?
Right. You never know.
Right. I've seen assessments for Moro online that actually was a TLR response, but the person doing the video said, see, Moro is active, but it was a tonic labyrinthine response that they saw, right? And STNR, oftentimes you'll see an assessment for that, but actually what they're assessing is ATNR because they put a head turn in. And so now we've got ATNR, right? So just understanding that level of complexity is vital. The more complex the child, the deeper understanding the practitioner has to have.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like I think, and again, to sum up too, so we've looked at reflexes are real. They are scientific basis. They're not fiction. However, there is a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of confusion. And I think that there's a lot of taking information that's very complex and trying to break it down and make it easy for people.
Yeah.
But when you do that, sometimes you lose the importance of the complexity, and that doesn't work for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So like try to take into account your own needs, try and take into account that some people understand that it's more complex than what they're saying and they're trying to explain it to you, because this is a very difficult topic, and breaking it down and trying to make it palatable, you can lose some things in translation. And so just know that like people need to learn and see that there's more to it than just movement, or there's more to it than just one reflex at a time.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where we get some confusion, or we get people who think it's more fiction or not real or doesn't work, because you're looking at a level that has been diluted, not at the level where there's 12 different pieces coming together. So
Right. Absolutely.
well, the good news is that eventually Mary will have a course maybe for us.
I'm working on it's definitely in progress, and my target is March 1st. It'll be an introduction to neuroreflexes. That's the term I use to address all of the reflexes, neuroreflexes. March 1st, I'm hoping to have that done. But it is
Amazing.
pretty time intensive, so just trying to carve out.
It is. It takes, and like we've talked about, there's a lot of pieces, and so trying to like make sure you get the highlights without overwhelming is a tough
Right.
is a tough piece, I feel like. And when you're working with kids, there's also maybe the way you want to do it and then the way you have to do it, because the kids are kids,
Right.
right?
That is
So there's a
true.
piece of that too. And so there's real life, which is why we're doing this podcast, because it's complex and it's too hard to explain. So we're just having conversations about it, and we've got very similar but a little bit different views, and we've got lots of different experiences, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well, as we wrap up here, Angela, how about a fun fact? What's a fun fact about you?
oh, a fun fact about me. My fun fact is that I've actually written some children's books.
You have.
Um,
I have one.
I have.
Yeah.
So I've written one's called Hazel Hears the Earth. My new one is Willow Hears the Water.
Oh.
How about you, Mary? What's your fun fact? As people get to know us.
Fun fact about me, 2016, I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk in Temecula,
Woo!
California. Yeah, it really was a life-changing experience for me. Took me out of that imposter syndrome that I think so many of us struggle with when we're learning new things, and like, oh yeah, I am kind of an expert in this field. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So it's available on YouTube. It's called Brain Moves. My last name used to be Mollway, so it's under Mollway, Mollway, but it's called Brain Moves, and it is on reflex integration and how it can change how people show up in the world. So yeah, that's my fun fact.
Absolutely amazing. So very cool. Thank you, Mary.
Well, Angela, thanks so much for joining me today for our first episode. I'm very excited about expanding what we're going to talk about. And if people had questions, do we have a way for them to contact us?
You can email us at brainsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. You can find Mary at her website, brain-works.org, or on Facebook with her Facebook Reflex Integration groups. If you would like that information, please check our show notes. And you can find Angela at angelapt.com or rainbowdragonbooks.com. Thanks for listening.